All right. Good evening and welcome to the Kahal Yereim doubleheader edition.
We're back.
Of Daf Yomi. We are making up for lost time. We're sponsored for this week by my father in honor of his friends Yehuda Greenwood and Jeffrey Wald and the rest of the Kila. And Daf Yomi for the week is also sponsored by Mr. Yehuda Greenwood. Le'ilui Nishmas Mercedes Bas Levi. We are 19 lines down from the top on Mem Beis, Amud Beis. Shmuel, last word on the line, Shmuel Amar. Shmuel says, we were discussing in the Mishnah that we had a interesting sort of conflicting statements at the end of our Mishnah. On the one hand, it said that we're not going to take an oath but for a child's claim. And then we had the last line of the Mishnah, we said there is a circumstance we have an oath of child's claim. At the end of the daf this morning, we had discussed that it really depends on what sort of claim is being made. It's being made on behalf of his father. It's being made with a certainty. So then maybe that's why there's an oath. Whereas if he's not certain, then there isn't a claim of an oath. Now we're going to have a different explanation. Shmuel says, "Lekoton lifra minichsei koton, lehektish lifra minichsei hektish." So it doesn't mean that when you are swearing for a koton, it means that you are swearing because a minor has made a claim against you, and now you have to swear in order, or to deflect that, or for that matter, that there's a claim being made against you by the Beis Hamikdash that you have to swear. Rather, it means that the person is coming to collect property which is now in the possession of a minor, but he has rights to. There's a shibud on it. Perhaps it means that that he has first rights to ownership of something, and then the property wound up in the possession of a koton, so now he's going to collect it. But we're going to establish for the protection of the minor and for the protection of hektish that if he's going to collect that property, which he has the right to, he's going to have to take an oath that he legitimately has that right, because he's going to be collecting. This is not a claim made against him from a minor, but since he's collecting from a minor or he's collecting from holy objects, we're going to make him take an oath. So, lifara minichse koton, here's the story about somebody who are going to collect from a minor. Tanina, we learned in a Mishnah, minichse yisomim, lo yifra ela b'shvua. If you're coming to collect from property of a orphan, so let's say, for example, this orphan has inherited property from his father, but his father may have gotten that property and it was already encumbered previously before his father got it through a lien to somebody else. So it's basically this property was mortgaged to somebody else, and then the father got a hold of it. Now the rule is that if the father winds up that the person can come and take it away. If the father was still alive, the person would be able to come and claim that land away. Now that it goes to the heirs, he's going to collect that from the minor as well. In order to collect it from the minor, he's going to have to take an oath. So, tarti lomali. So he says, so what is the point of two Mishnayos saying the same thing? Right? We have one Mishnah here, one Mishnah there. So, hakamash malan kida abaye kashisha. It's coming to teach me the rule of Abaye Kashisha, the Abaye the elder. And he says, Detani Abaye Kashisha said, Yisomim she'amru gedolim, ve'ein tzarech lomar ketanim. Right, when we said these orphans that you have to take an oath in order to collect from, we're talking about adult orphans even, right? Because they don't even know whether they don't their father's business, they inherit it, so we're going to make the guy take an oath. And for sure, we don't even have to mention, of course, if they're minors, then we have an additional obligation in order to protect their possessions. Bain lishvua, whether it's going to become for an oath. Bain liziboris, also as far as making a collection from the lowest quality property. We're going to make sure that normally property is going to be collected. It can be collected from middle grade property when it's collecting for a debt. We're going to collect from the lowest quality property. Lehektish, and when it comes to sanctified lands, lifara minichse hektish, in order to be able to collect from properties that belong to the Beis Hamikdash. So Tanina, we also learned that in a Mishnah. Minichasim mishubadim lo yifru ella bishvua. Right, if you're going to collect from encumbered properties, you can't collect without an oath. Mali mishubadim lehedyot, umamili mishubadim legavoa. So what would be the difference if they are encumbered? Why would it make a difference whether they are belong to a person or belong to the Beis Hamikdash? Why would I presume that I would make an oath if I was collecting from a regular person, like this case of the orphan, versus, and then I wouldn't have an obligation to take an oath if I was taking it from the Beis Hamikdash? So itzrich. No, I would think that because Sakotay Techamina, I would have thought to have said Hedyot de adam ose kinunya al hedyot. The reason why we are going to establish an oath is because there's a certain lack of credibility that the person is coming to collect has. Right? We're not exactly sure if he's telling the truth. Therefore, we're going to make him take an oath to ensure that he's telling the truth. That's the idea of an oath. Now, a person could figure and make some kind of calculations in order to get money away from, I really do own it, I don't know. He makes those kind of calculations when he's dealing with other people. However, of a hektish, right? But when it comes to the sanctity, Beis Hamikdash, nobody tries to cheat the Beis Hamikdash. Nobody thinks they're going to get away with one from the Beis Hamikdash. The ein adam osa knunya al hektish. Person doesn't make cheating arrangements with Beis Hamikdash. Kamashmo. So therefore, I wouldn't need an oath. He's trustable by itself. Kamashmo, and therefore it tells me no. Even in that circumstance, you had better make the person take an oath to be sure. V'amar Rav Huna, didn't Rav Huna say, Shchiv meira shehikdish kol nechasov. Let's say a person who was about to die, and he consecrated all his possessions. This is a throwback, right?
Yeah, that's the first thing we learned
correct.
Together.
He's going to sanctify all of his, right?
Yeah.
Yep, he's going to sanctify all of his possessions to the Beis Hamikdash. V'amar, and he said, Mana liploni biyadi. He says that so-and-so I owe so-and-so some money. So that means that so-and-so can go to the Beis Hamikdash and collect that 100, because he's admitted that he really owed that, and before all of his property is sanctified, he has an obligation to pay that off first. So Naaman, he's believed. Why? Chazaka in adam osa knunya al hektish. He's believed because we don't presume anybody's going to make these kinds of tricky arrangements and cheat the Beis Hamikdash out of something. So therefore, he must be telling the truth. And so now the question is, if that's the case, he doesn't have to take an oath. The Shchif Mari doesn't have to take an oath. We just presume he's telling the truth because nobody would make a trick with the Beis Hamikdash. So Amri Hani Mili Shchiv Mira. No, but the answer to that is that's because he's on his deathbed. That also gives somebody a little bit more credibility. He's not lying on his deathbed. He doesn't stand to gain. He doesn't stand to make a material gain and then lose an olam haba. He's not going to do it. Dein adam chote velo lo. Person's not going to sin and get no benefit out of it. Aval gabi bari. But if the guy's a healthy guy, vadei chashin, we are going to be a little bit worried that the person's going to try to get a little bit extra money out of the Beis Hamikdash. And so therefore we are going to make him take that.
Wouldn't he be greedy? That'll be greedy.
It would indeed, and that's what we're concerned, right? There's a natural greediness that people have, right? Says the next Mishnah, Ve'elu dvarim she'ein nishbayin aleim. This is the list of things that we don't take oaths over, right? If this is the property that we're dealing with, nobody takes an oath. Ha'avadim, slaves, shtaros, contracts, ve'karkos, and land, ve'hekdeshos, and things that are sanctified to the Beis Hamikdash. Ein bahen tashlumei kefel. So not only that, but there's also, if they get stolen, you don't have to pay double. V'lo tashlumi arba v'chamisha. Also, you don't have to pay 4 and 5 times if you steal a sheep or an ox and then you sell it or slaughter it. You don't have to.
If you take something from the Beis Hamikdash, if you sell something from the Beis Hamikdash, aren't you chayav some?
You could be chayav me'ila. You're worrying about me'ila, right? The concept of using something that belongs to the Beis Hamikdash, right? So that is also a concern, right? But this is going to be now the oath and the requirement to repay. The guy's denying it, right? There's no punishment if the guy got away with it, if he's denying it all. So, shomer chinam, if he is a watchman and he's watching an object with no pay, so he's doing somebody a favor. Could you watch my stuff for me? And he's watching somebody's stuff. So that person is responsible to repay only under circumstance where the damage is caused by his negligence. Told me to watch.
Or if he gets robbed.
No, not robbed, right? It's only if it's negligence, right? That's by shomer chinam. And the thing is, right, that you're thinking of the shomer sachar, which we're going to say in a moment, right? The shomer chinam, by the shomer chinam, I tell the guy, watch my dog, and I go, sure, I'll watch your dog, and then I forgot to feed him for the whole 2 weeks that you were away, and the dog is now no longer my dog. So if that is the circumstance, that's negligence, and I'm going to have to repay, right? However, if I open the door to feed the dog runs out and disappears, I don't have to. It's not my negligence. I did everything I was supposed to do. Okay, Eino Nishba. He doesn't swear. No say so, and he doesn't swear, right? So he doesn't have to swear that he was negligent, that he wasn't negligent. And then no say sachar, somebody who's paid, a paid watchman has greater amounts of responsibility. He has to repay under circumstance of theft and loss, right? Geneva vave, do we call it, right? Circumstances of theft and loss. He also has to repay for that. So he would have to take an oath to say that I'm not responsible because what happened was it was ones, something completely not my fault, right? there was an earthquake, the house collapsed, the dog was inside. Sorry, right? Not my fault at all, right? Versus, right? I lost the dog. I opened the door. The dog ran out. I lost the dog. That would be my responsibility because you got paid. So as a paid watchman, you are responsible, have greater amounts of responsibility. This guy does not pay if the item that's lost is one of these lists, the slave or the contract, or it's a contract, or it's land, or something exactish. We'll see why in the Gemara. Rabbi Shimon says, "Kodshim shechayev bachra yuson nishbain alehen, v'she'enu chayev bachra yuson ein nishbain alehen." There's two ways to declare something holy to the Beis Hamikdash. A person could say, "This animal is going to be a sacrifice," or a person could say, "I have a responsibility of bringing a sacrifice." What's the difference? If I say this animal is going to be a sacrifice, and then this animal dies, then I guess this animal's not going to be a sacrifice, and that's the end of it. But if I say I'm responsible for a sacrifice, and then I take an animal and I start bringing it, and it dies, I still have to bring another sacrifice. So that means that if I'm in a circumstance, we call this chayv b'achro yuson. If I say that I'm responsible for a sacrifice, and I'm still going to be responsible for it, even if the first animal dies, so even though the animal that died belonged to the Beis Hamikdash, we're going to call this, it's almost like it's what we call a davar hagorem l'mamon. It's something that causes a financial loss because I have to go back to my flock and I have to get another sheep and donate that one to the Beis Hamikdash, which causes me a loss. Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that davar hagorem l'mamon k'mamon dami, that if it's going to cause me a loss, then it is a loss, and that's going to be also the circumstance. Okay, so when it comes to kodshim, since it's my loss, so if it's a circumstance where I'm responsible for that loss, then I would take an oath because it's still my money. And if it's a circumstance where I'm not responsible for it, if it gets lost, so then it belongs to hektish, and I don't have to swear, and I have to take oaths for that. Rameir says, Yesh dvarim shehein bekarka ve'enon kekarka. There are some things that are on land, but they're not like land. They don't have the same law. Ve'ein chachamim modim lo. But the Chum don't agree with him. The Chum say, no, everything that's on land is like land. Ketzad, what are we talking about? Eser gefonim te'unus masarti lach. All right, when I gave you the land, there were vineyards, there were vines on the land, and they were full of grapes. The other one says, no, there were only 5 vines. So I'm not returning you the vines. Rabbi Meir Mechayev Shvuah. Rabbi Meir says, those vines, even though they're attached to the ground, are not like the ground itself. Therefore, you can have to take an oath on the vines. The Chacham say, Kol hamechubar lekarka harei kukarka. Anything that's attached to the ground is like ground itself, and therefore the vines, there's no oath, right? Even though you admitted to half of the claim, you don't have to take an oath because it's land. You only have to swear if the items have a set quantity or a set weight. Sorry, that midam is a set. Let's say a set measurement. Really, what it means. But it's like a size, a set weight, or a set number. Ketzad, how so? Bayis mole masarti lach. I gave you a storehouse full of produce. V'kis mole masarti lach. I give you a purse full of money, right? El masha nachta ata notel. And he says, no, I don't know what that amount means, but all I know is here's what I'm returning to you, and whatever it was, this is what it is. So putter, that is not motive and makes us. That's not admitting part of the claim, right? Because he's saying, I don't know what it was that you gave me, but I'm giving everything back. That's his claim, is giving everything back. And there's no definite volumes here. You need to have a number that you're telling me that I owe more, and I'm admitting to part of it. That's what you need right? Ze omer ad haziz. For example, if somebody says it was up to the rafters, this storehouse was full to the rafters, Ze omer ad achalon, and the other person says, no, it was only full to the window, so then he's chayiv, now he's liable, because that is a measurement, right? Filled up till this height versus filled up to this height, now you got measurements, okay? Says the Gemara, Tashlumi kefel minalim. How do I know that paying double, right? We had already discussed why in oaths, because we had that pasuk by the oaths. Remember, we learned a klal pratu klal, and we had learned that land was not, and contracts were not were not included in the requirement to take oaths. And it's going to be very similar psukim. So if you don't remember it, this is going to sound very familiar. But what is the source for if you have to steal, you don't have to pay double if the item you stole was land or contracts, etc. The Tanur Rabban and rabbis learned, I'll call davar pesha, on anything that you sinned, that's the klal, that's the general. Al shor al chamor v'al sev al salma, if it's you stole an ox or a donkey or a sheep or a garment, that's the prat, those are the details. Al kol aveda, or any lost item, chazar klal, that's the generality again. Klal u'pratu klal, so this is the general, right, specific and general. Yatada'an elakena prat, so we're going to rule like whatever the details are of the what is the common denominator between the details. Ma prat mefurish davar metaltel v'gufa mamon. All of those items in that specific cases are movable items. They have value, financial value. Af kol davar metaltel. Therefore, it only is going to include, this rule is going to only include movable items, the gufa mamon, that have financial value. Yatsu, that's going to exclude karkaos, land, she'ein metaltel, because land is not a movable item. So therefore, by technical decision, right? That's how they call it, right? The technical decision is going to be removed from this payment of double. Yatu avodim, and then slaves are also going to be excluded because shehukshid karkos, because whatever happens with land happens with slaves. Those two things go together. And yatu shtaros, contracts are also out. Shafa pishehi metalton, because even though those are movable, ein gufan mamon, they have no intrinsic financial value. They're just pieces of paper. Okay, hektish. And when hektish re'ehu ksiv, and hektish is excluded because the pasuk says this is when he is stealing from his re'ehu, his neighbor or his friend, and hektish is excluded. That's not. It's an entity, right? Mm-hmm. Hektish is a corporate entity, right? It's not a person. Right. So therefore, he's stealing from hektish is, as Yehudas point out, me'ilah. It's not the same sort of thing as stealing from a person, though. Okay, next. Velo tashlume arba'a v'chamisha. You also don't have to pay 4 or 5 times. Why not? My taima. Why don't you pay 4 or 5 times for these items? Tashum arba'a v'chamisha, because the Torah says you're going to pay when you steal these items. You pay 4 or 5 times. Velo tashlumi shlosh v'arba'a, not 3 or 4 times. Now, what does that mean? That means we already said that when you steal an item, before you slaughter it or sell it, you have to pay double. Then, if you slaughter or steal it, then we add on another 2 times to that, or 3 times to it. So that means that if you're not paying double, then what are you paying? Just the 3 times or the 4 times? Well, if you're only paying 3 or 4 times, the Torah doesn't have any such thing like that at all. So therefore, once you have excluded these items from paying double, they're also excluded from paying 3 or 4 or 5 times. They're also going to be excluded saying 4 or 5 times. Next one. Shomer chinam eno nishba. A person who is a free watchman does not have to swear. Minani mili, where do I know that from? The Tanur Rabban and our rabbis learned. On to Mem Gimel Amid Aleph. Ki tein ish el rei ehu, right? Person gives an item to his friend. Klal, that's the generality. Kesef okelim, money or utensils. Prat, that's the details. Lishmor, to guard. Chazar uklal, that's the generality again. Klal pratu klal. They're general, specific, general. We're only going to rule according to the specific. Mahaprat mefurish davar metalto v'gufa mamon. Just like the detail is money and utensils, which are items that are movable and they have financial value. Avkol davar metalto v'gufa mamon. These are also going to only include those items that are movable and have financial value. Yatsu karkos, which is going to exclude land, as we said. She'ein metaltalin, because they're not movable. Yatsu avodim, slaves are going to be excluded. Sheukshel karkos, because that goes together with land. Yatsu shtaros, contracts are going to be excluded. Why? Shafal pish and metalton, because even though they're movable, ein gufan mamon, they don't have intrinsic financial value. Hektish, and hektish is removed because re'u ksiv, also in that pasuk it says re'ehu again. So hektish is not considered your friend. No say sachar, somebody who is a paid watchman also, he doesn't pay. Me no, and how do I know that? The Tanur Rabban and rabbis learned. Kitain ish el re'ehu klal. Somebody gives his friend money. Gives a person money. That's the generality. Chamor oshor oseh. Right? What items? A ox or a donkey or a sheep. Prat. That's the detail. V'chol behema lishmor. Or any animal to guard. Chazar klal. That's the generality. Klal prat to klal. My general, specific, general. And etc., as we had said, that then we're going to exclude all those items that don't have financial value and are not movable. Land is not movable. Contracts don't have financial value. Slaves go with land. Same drashas again. And hektish, Re'ehu ksiv. Again, hektish says Re'ehu, so therefore hektish is excluded. Rabbi Meir, we go on to the next thing. Rabbi Meir says, Yesh dvarim shenke karkavin kukar. The next thing the Mishnah says, that Rabbi Meir points out, there are certain types of items that are like land, but not like land, right? Those were the vineyards that have grapes on them. Miklau, de Rabbi Meir savar, that means that Rabbi Meir is saying, Kol hamechuber lekarka einu kekarka. That means that if the rabbis are saying that those things that are attached to land are like land, that means Rabbi Meir is arguing and saying those things that are attached to land are not like land. Ademiflagi beteunos liflige beserukos. Then why do they bother talking about vineyards that have grapes on them? Why not talk about the vines themselves, right? The vines themselves with no grapes on there. Because the argument would be a much clearer argument if the argument were about the plants themselves rather than the grapes. So Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. So Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina explains, Hacha ba'anavim omdos lihi batzer kamiflig, because they're not arguing about the vines. Everyone agrees the vines are attached to the ground. They're like the ground. The issue here is we have completely ripe grapes. They're ready for picking. Rabbi Meir holds kibitzuros domyon. Even though they have not yet been picked, since they're no longer dependent on their sustenance and survival from the ground, they're as though they are separate from the ground. And therefore, you're gonna need to take an oath over swearing that you only owe part of that claim. For Rabbanan Savri, and the rabbis are saying, lo kibitzuros domyon, they're not harvested. The fact is that they're still attached to their plant, therefore they're still part of the ground, therefore there's exemption from oaths. We don't take an oath unless it has some kind of measurement to it or weight to it. Amar Abaye says, Lo shanu ela da'amar le bayis stam. The Mishnah said that if he says, you gave me a houseful is not a measurement. If he just said a houseful, that's not a measurement. Aval amar le bayis ze male yedia tante. But if he says the houseful of this houseful, okay, then I can measure that house and I know how much this house is worth, how big this house is, and that is considered all right. That's a really reasonable measure of claim. Amar le Rava says ihachi adetani seifa. Then if that's true, then why does it say later on the next case is ze omer adaziz v'ze omer adachalon, that within the house one guy says it was filled up to the rafters and the other guy says it was filled up to the window. So then he's chayiv. So then he'd be liable. If what you're saying is true, that it just depends on which house if you pick a specific house, then why did you use the case of the rafters and the window? Liflog v'lisnei b'dida, you could have just had the same case and you could have explained it this. But when is it not considered to be a measurable item when I say a house? That is b'bayis mole, when I just say a full house. Aval bayis zeh, but if I say this house mole, which was full, then he's chayiv, then he'd be liable. Right? Because if otherwise, just a house in general, it's not a measurement. El Amar Rava, so Rava says, Li'olamenu chayav ad sheyitanenu b'davar shebamida uv'shemishkal u'b'shebeminyan. So rather, Rava says that no, there has to be a measurement, there has to be a weight, there has to be a number. V'yoda lo b'davar shebamida uv'shemishkal mishkan. And not only that, but the denial or the admission of part of it has to also likewise have a specific amount as well. Tanya Kavasi de Rava, there's a brisa that supports Rava's statement. Kort vua li biyadcha. One person says, I have a core of wheat in your possession. V'hala omer ein lecha biyadi, and the other person says, I deny that claim 100%. Potter, no oath there, because he didn't admit to any of it. Menorah gedola yesh li biyadcha. I've got a large candelabra nearby you. Right? And he says, Ein lecha biyadi el menorah ketana. And he says, no, it's a small menorah. Okay? Now, why is that not liable? We're going to try to see why. Well, at least sounds like we're going to presume, because large and small are not measurables. Right? So then Patra, then he's exempt. Azura gedola yesh li biyadcha. I've got a big belt. Right? You've got a big belt of mine that you're holding on to. And he says, Ein lecha biyadi ela azura ketana. No, I have a small belt, right? It's not a small belt. Potter, again, big and small. That's not a meaningful size. Aval, however, Amar lo kor tvu yeshli biyadcha. If the person says very specifically, I have a core of wheat in your hand. Vehala Omer, and the other person says, Ein l'cha biyadi ela lesach. No, you have half a core. Okay, now that's chayav. That would be now he's liable. Menorah bas eser litrin yeshli biyadcha. You've got a menorah which has a weight of 10 litra. Okay. And he says, Ein lecha biyadi ela bas chamesh litra. And he says, no, it's a 5 litra menorah. Now it's a specific weight. And so therefore you said big one, and you said this 10, and you said 5.
5
now
he's like 5 pounds, or was it?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure. I didn't look up what the weight of a litra is. It's good trying to remember to put that on the chat, how much a litra is, if he mentions that there in the article. We'll take a look what it is. So then he's chayav, then he'd be liable. Klolo shel davar, the rule is, Liolam eino chayav ad sheyitanenu bedavar shebamida v'shemishkov shebaminyan. Then whenever we say there's a rule, we're going to include a new case. So we're going to ask what that case is in a moment. But the rule is that it has to have some kind of measurement, weight, or count. V'yodelo bedavar shebamida v'shemishkov shemishkan, and the person has to answer back, I admit to part of your claim also in a measurement, a weight, or a number of things. Klalo shel davar lasuye mai. So the question we're going to ask is, whenever a Bryce or a Mishnah says the general rule is, it means that it's coming to include something that wasn't already specified. There's no point in making a general rule of something if all of the cases are already specified. So lav lasuye bayis zeh malay, isn't it coming to include the case where the person said this house, and we said that means that's considered a measurement. Okay, so there you go. Now, question is, Maishna menorah gedola menorah ketana. Why is it that menorah, somebody says a large menorah, and the other person says a small menorah? That's no good. What's wrong with that? So, Masha hitanu lo hodelo. The answer is because there's no admission of anything. Why? Because a large menorah and a small menorah are not the same menorah. Right? When I say you owe me a big menorah and I say, no, I only owe you a small menorah, I'm not saying I owe you half of that menorah. I'm saying it's a different menorah. Therefore,
there's giant menorahs out on the street, for example.
So therefore, it's not modeh b'miktsas. You're not, right? If I tell you, you have one of those big Chabad menorahs of mine. No, it's one of these small ones. That's not the same menorah. So I'm not admitting to the claim. So umasha hodelo lotano, what I'm admitting is not what you demanded of me. So therefore, that's why I'm not paying. Well, ihachi, if that's true, so then why is it that later on this brisa we have this next case, bas eser bas chamesh nami. One guy says you had a menorah that was worth 10 litra, and he says no, it was a menorah worth 5 litra. That can't be the same menorah. So therefore, why is he liable? Mashatanu lo hodelo, masha hodelo lotanu. What you just demanded, I didn't admit to, and what you just admitted to, I didn't demand. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak explains, Hacha bemenorah shel cholios askinon. The answer is that we're dealing with a menorah that has attachable pieces. It's like, I don't know, imagine Lego or something like that, right? I have extension pieces to it. So therefore, when I say it's a question that we're arguing about, how many pieces of the menorah I had, right? I had this candelabra, and it had, I don't know, I guess side extensions to it, whatever. I gave you enough of those extensions that it was worth 10 litra. And you answer back, no, I had that menorah, but I only had 5 of the extensions, only 5 litra, right? So now you're arguing within the same menorah, okay? That's what he's saying. The kamoda lemina, he's admitting to part of the same menorah. Ihachi, if that's true, azuranami nesne, velokme, bedelaifi. So he says, well, then what about the belt? Why is it that the belt wouldn't work the same way? Why are we not suggesting the belt also could be a circumstance where he has a belt that you said, oh, it's a large belt. I said, no, it's a small belt, but we're really not arguing because it's the same belt, I cut off pieces of it. The belt could be stitched together or it could be broken into pieces. So therefore, maybe the belt that you gave me is the same belt. And I'm agreeing that I took part of the belt that you have. So Ella b'delaifi lo ketani. So the answer is, because that's not the case that it's brought up. So achinami bishal cholios loktani. So if that's the case, that's also not what it says about the menorah. You just invented that part about the menorah with attachable parts that's not listed in this story. So Ella Amar of Rav Abba Bar Mamel. So rather, Rav Abba Bar Mamel explains Shani menorah. You know what's different about the menorah case? Hol v'yachol legorah ulamida achamesh litrin. What's the difference between a 10-litra menorah and a 5-litra menorah? How thick the base is.
Okay.
So therefore, what happens is that I said I handed it to you and it had a thick base, and I said no. What happened was it got carved off, it shaved off. When you gave it to me, it only had a thin base to it. What happened to all the rest of the gold of the menorah? I don't know. It's not how you gave it to me. Same menorah, but less gold on it. So therefore, that's why it can be the same menorah. Okay. Says the next Mishnah. Hamalves chavero aramashkon. Right now, this is person that lends money to his friend, and he has a security deposit. Okay. So the way that this goes, right? The lender gets the security deposit. The borrower gets the money. Right.
And the security deposit could be like a piece of
that's
property, like,
it's going to be we're going to want it to be
value.
It's going to be a movable item, because otherwise it's not going to be an oath, and we're going to wind up ruining everything, right? So I'm going to say it's going to be some item of value. The question that we're going to have is, does the item have to have the equivalent value, or what happens if the item doesn't or does have the equivalent value as the loan? Obviously, if I borrow $5,000 and give you my Rolex watch, right, then circumstance, that's a good collateral, right? So then now what happens if I say I lost the collateral? So if I lose the collateral, then that means you don't have to pay me back the money, because basically it's considered paid off because of the collateral, right? What if the collateral is a Casio watch? Okay, well, then it's just a good reminder. The fact that you're holding on to my Casio watch reminds me of the fact that I haven't paid back yet, but it doesn't have the value, right? Okay, so now, here's what happens, right? The borrower gets the money, and the lender gets the collateral. The avad hamashkon, the collateral gets lost. Okay? So Amar Lo, so now he says, the lender says, Sela hilvisicha, I lent you a sela. That was the amount of the loan, right? Alav, on this Vishekel haya shave. And the loan and the mashkon, the collateral, was worth a shekel. Now, shekel is two shekels in a sela, right? So therefore, he's claiming he's claiming that you still owe me the other half, because I lost. You're right. I lost something that was worth a shekel, but the loan was for a sela, so you still owe me a shekel. So the Hala Omer, the borrower says, "Lo, that's not true. Ki ela sela hilvisani alav v'sela hayashave." He says, "No, that thing that the collateral, it was worth a sela. So I borrowed a sela, but I gave you an item worth a sela, hence we're even." So if that's the case, then putter. There's no oath there. Why? Because he's denying that he owes any money. Basically, this is a claim, right? The lender is claiming you owe me a shekel, and the borrower is claiming I owe you 0. So that is not modim b'miktas, hence there's no oath. Okay? Next. I'm trying to work my way through. Sela hilvisicha. Person says, I lent you a sela, a love, right, on this mashkon. V'shekel hayashave, and the loan, right, the loan was a sela. The item that was the mashkon was worth a shekel. The hala omer, the other guy says, lo ki ella sela hilvisani alav. No, the loan was a sela. Ushlosha dinarim hayashave, and the mashkon's was worth 3 dinarim. Now, 3 dinarim is a shekel and a half. Okay, so there are 4 dinarim in a sela. There's 2 shekel in a sela. There's 4 dinarim. So basically, you owe me. One guy says the one guy's claim is the loan was $100, and the item that I lost was $50 worth. You owe me $50. Okay, and the other guy says no. The loan was $100, but the item I gave you was $75. So I owe you $25. So now he's chayev, he's liable for the oath. Why? Because now he's modim b'miktas. Because you're claiming that I owe you $50, and I'm saying no, but I do owe you $25. So now it's modim b'miktas. Now I have to pay. Now I have to swear. Sela hilvisani alav. Next case is the loan was a sela. Ushtayim haya shaveh. And now the pikadon was worth 2 selas. So now, right, that's where the loan was $1,000, and the security deposit was a Rolex, right? So it's possible that the security deposit is worth more than the loan, right? So he's saying that it was worth nothing. The Hala Omer, the other one says, lo, no, ki ella selva hilvasi chalav v'sel hayashava. The other guy says, no, not true. The loan was for a sela, and the collateral was a sela. You owe me nothing. Right? So the borrower is saying, you actually owe me money now because you lost my expensive item, so you owe me. And the other guy says, I don't owe you anything. So Potter, now he's exempt, right? Because not motive mitzvos, right? The last case is, Sela hilvisani alav ushtayim haya shaveh. And this is where the borrower says, you lent me a sela, and the item that I gave you as collateral was worth double that. The halom, and the other one person says, lo ki ela sela huvisi chalav v'chamisha dinarim hayashaveh, that it was worth, it was that the loan was for 1 sela, and the item was, in fact, you're right, the item was worth more than was worth more than a sela. It was worth 5 dinarim. So I'm agreeing that I owe you some, but I don't agree that I owe you as much as you think. So chayiv, so now he's liable. Umi nishba, who is the one who swears in this case? Misha pikadon etzlo, the one who was the person who lost the security item, right? Why? Because shema yishba zeh v'yotzi hala esa pikadon. Because what we're worried about is what might happen is that this person who is the borrower is going to swear to how much the item was worth, and then after he swears, the person who says he lost the item will then find the item. And then he's going to say, look, you were wrong. So now you swear falsely. And now you swear falsely, we can't believe you at all about your claim about having paid it all, and it's going to cause a big problem. So therefore, to avoid that, we are going to, what do you call it? We're going to, I lost my train of thought. Right, we're going to make the person who has the pikadon, who lost the security deposit, take the oath. Okay, maybe we'll stop here. So we will continue from the top of Mem Gimel Amud Beis, because I know that what's going to wind up happening is this page runs right in, and Mem Dal is very short anyway. So
Perfect. Okay. All right. Go ahead. Beautiful. Okay.